Good morning, everyone. This is IE 563, the review of case study, the rental car, where we'll be reviewing the Japanese air raid on a US military base. The team consists of me, Jonathan, Clint Khan, as well as Cesar Vasquez. And today it's October 28th. Next. So the problem statement here, first we will provide a summary of the entire case study, which is this is during the time of the World War II and the US is fighting the Japanese, and they are doing an ambush attack on the US military base located at the Pacific Island. During this ambush attack, pilot Dan Bowman finds himself in a unique situation where he must fly a newly designed plane that is on the base to prevent the Japanese from destroying the plane that's sitting on the base. So that in itself leads us to the key problem to our entire case study, which is the pilot could not fly the plane off the ground during the attack. In the next slide, I'll be giving some key assumptions here to establish some boundary to the key problem that I just mentioned, to really give some clarity and direction to the rest of the supporting slides that we will be discussing. So some of the key assumptions that we have here is all pilots that are on the base are well trained to fly, and they are oriented to fly a specific model of plane. Also, our second key assumption here is the United States is currently in a war and they cannot decide not to participate in the war because there's just too much at stake here. The third assumption here is the plane designer who was designing the new design of the plane is not a combat pilot. And our last key assumption here is all pilots are trained for combat situation, and it takes into account weather as well as different environmental factors in the war zone. On my next slide, I'll be discussing the major factors. So major factors are problems that we see or factors that we see in which the problem would have been avoided if these factors were not present. So in our major factors, we split them to three distinct categories to give additional clarification and direction for our audience here today. So in our three major factors, the first group is the procedural issue, where we see pilot training as being one of the major factors, because not all of them that are on base are oriented with all the planes that were on the military base. And on the second procedural issue, one of the biggest key issue here is there's a undefined procedure of integrating new planes into existing fleet. This can be seen with the new plane being brought to the base without having a pilot or all the pilot being well trained to fly the new plane. On the plane design, we see that the radical controls layout were significantly different compared to existing models of planes that's on the base. So really this provided an additional challenge, which we think is a major factor, as well as an inconsistent procedural startup flow in the cockpit design, where there isn't a standard like we do today in the industry standards, like an ISO standard, where everything would be consistent between plane models, where we see a systematic clockwise startup procedure on existing planes, but a somewhat different layout on the new plane. And last but not least, our major factors here is the human factors. As I mentioned, the plane design or the plane designer in itself did not consider the human factors, where they're not putting themselves in the shoes of the wartime pilots, where such a radical layout change or any layout change would actually be a huge difference between a success or loss of a pilot in a combat situation. On the next slide, I'll be presenting the minor factors. These are the factors where plays key roles as well, but add into the major, I guess, the key problems that I stated. On the minor factors, there are 4 different distinct categories. First will be the procedural, where there isn't any redundancy built into the system. So what I'm trying to say here is there's only the same exact amount of planes versus pilot. So if there's anything happen to an existing plane, there is no additional plane that the pilot could use to fly. Also, there's no backup strategy, or I simply would call it, there's no plan B from what was discussed in the case study to protect the planes from an air raid damage. So in this situation, the pilots were scrambling, but there wasn't any plan B or fallback plan that were discussed. From a plane design standpoint, a startup procedure where less steps to start up a plane would certainly increase the probability of success on the case study. The second point here is a lot of times there isn't a easy way to distinguish whether a plane has been occupied or not, especially if a pilot trying to run to a plane from the back, they do not know if the plane has already been manned or not. So if there's a way to identify it, that would definitely make it easier for them to locate an empty plane to fly. From an environmental standpoint, the bomb holes that were resulted by the Japanese attack made it a less than ideal runway, which definitely added some challenge and difficulty for the pilot to navigate, as well as the hot and humid heat from the war zone certainly adds some physical stress. And also a single design of runway limited the chance of success. So if there's additional runways, definitely would help the pilot to find an alternate route to fly the plane off, rather than trying to attempt a less than ideal perfect running or runway condition. Also, the short reaction time of the surprise ambush attack by the Japanese put the pilot certainly under stress. And also, last but not least, from an environmental standpoint, is there's a possibility of a pilot must run the entire length of a runway to get to an open plane. The last minor factors here is from a measurement standpoint, that the current alert system did not provide enough notification time of an air raid. And in my next slides, I'll be discussing all of the different alternatives briefly here that we came out with to address the majors and the minor factors. So some of the alternatives that were discussed is it requires all pilots to be oriented on all planes on base, so they could fly any different planes at any given time. A consistent layout of controls between model of planes certainly help to reduce the learning curve. The third alternative we discussed was there's a team to initiate start of the plane, so all the pilot would do is to just jump into the cockpit and be ready to fly, rather than having to take the chalk off and do a lot of pre-step before jumping into the cockpit. We also discussed where additional ground artillery would certainly buy some time to slow down the Japanese airplanes from attacking the US planes. The next two alternatives is a decoy or camouflage to draw attention to Japanese fighter planes from actually attacking the actual planes. So a decoy as well as a camouflage would give time as well as probability of success for the US pilots to fly the plane off. Also, from the case study, if we were to have an alternative to place the pilots closer to the planes to reduce their commuting time or running to the plane, this would help them, provide them more time to fly the plane off the ground. Also, a quick orientation user manual So really, when we talk about a quick orientation user manual, it's a 4 or 5 step quick start for a pilot in case they are under stress and they can't be thinking straight. This would help them to get situated properly. Also, plane designer should be a pilot, because now the designer would be in the shoes of a wartime war zone pilot, where they would understand the requirement and needs of a pilot during the wartime. The last slides here is the additional rest of the alternatives. Also, we discussed about using symbols and color for easy identification of controls. As you can see, today in your cars, you have the emergency light that's symboled by a red triangle. So something along that line where it's easy for identification of startup for pilots. Again, camouflage planes to help planes that cannot get off the ground, where they could somewhat hide themselves from the view of the Japanese fighter. We talk about tuck cards too, in case of any issues with the plane. Could be an engine failure, or could be a pilot issue that they could move the planes out of actual sight. Multiple runways certainly help to increase the probability of success rather than having just one single runway. Again, we discussed about the identification of means of manned planes, where if there is a pilot already in a plane, there is a way to signal it rather than a pilot running all the way up to realize that it's already been manned. The last, one of the alternatives that we discussed too was the first pilot out of the pilot house or the command house would run to the furthest plane, so that it's a first in first out system, where this would help the last person coming out to fly the closest plane. An improved alert system certainly help. It gives us more time for the pilot to prepare for an ambush attack, if any. And a redundancy of pilots per plane is also a key alternative too, because now you would have additional pilot on base in case there is any issue with existing pilots, or pilots that are not comfortable flying any planes. Last but not least, here on our alternative list is a procedure to ensure all pilots can fly new planes before the planes are actually present on the base. So this would ensure all pilots are well prepared and comfortable with the design of the plane before the plane actually even arrive or being put in the base.